How'd we do? Is that better? Let's go to the chat and see.
Yay!
Oh, all right.
Okay.
That's great. Starting over. So we'll give it a try now. Wonderful. Thanks for staying with us. We're glad that you didn't check out. You didn't give up. We hope we'll continue. As I was saying, we want to say welcome to all of you. I'm going to go through the introduction pretty quickly, but we're so glad that y'all are with us tonight, and we're really looking forward to this next 6 weeks together. My name is Ryan Price. I'm the senior pastor at Broadway Baptist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. And
I'm Irie Price. I am not the senior pastor at Broadway Baptist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm a technical writer, but been married to this guy for 15 years, and we've been doing a lot of thinking about race, as you might be able to imagine.
So we're so glad that y'all are joining us with that. It's our experience that we're at such a seminal moment, a critical moment in the life of our nation at this time. And it's really important that we have the opportunity to have a conversation like this over what I think is a really important book, and that is Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. So we want to say welcome to all of you. There were about 300 people who have signed up for this, and people as far away as Michigan and New Jersey and South Carolina. So far and wide, we want to say welcome to all of you. In addition to welcomes, I also want to add a welcome to Jen Nelson, who is the Director of Communications at Broadway, and someone who will be joining us in and out, and I will be helping us this evening. It's already helped us this evening figure out a technical issue. So we want to say welcome to you. We wanted to introduce you, and just Jen's going to be really facilitating the chat conversation and the questions and answers. And I know that she has a few things to say at the outset here. So we want to say thank you, Jen, for helping us with this.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank Gary. We're so excited to see all of y'all here. There's quite a bit of you. I'm going to try to keep this quick so I don't take up too much of your time, but I will be assisting, as Ryan said, as your online moderator for this session. And I just wanted to give you a few words of instruction. We have over 300 people attending tonight, so that will limit some of the discussion and interaction, but we still want to hear from you. For tonight's session, if you have a question that you would like to pose to Ryan and Irie, use the Q&A feature that you'll notice at the bottom of your screen. So you should see, as a attendee, option to see mute, Q&A, chat, and raise your hand. We will be looking at those Q&A questions. If you chat, as you've done, to let us know about sound issues, I'll be keeping an eye out for that as well. And again, my name is Jen. So you can look for me there for the chat questions. We're only going to be able to probably discuss about 5 or 6 questions given the time and the magnitude of people on the call. So we may not be able to get to your question tonight. However, we do want to be able to address it. So in the coming weeks, we would ask that you submit your questions in advance as you're reading via email to Ryan and Irie. And we have an email address, which is bookstudy@broadwaybc.org. I'll be sharing that in the chat, and I'll be talking about it again at the end when we get to our Q&A. So I'll give you instructions for submitting your questions via that email again at the end of the call and tonight's session. And in addition, we are recording this session, so we will be providing it to you as a video link if you want to revisit it. We're excited to have you here tonight. Thank you.
Wonderful. Jen, thank you so much. I want to thank not only Jen, but also Tracy McKee, who has been handling a lot of the communication with all of you over these last several weeks, and she's done a tremendous job as well. So we want to thank her for all of the help. I think we want to jump right in. And as we're doing that, probably it's best to talk a little bit about the ground rules that we came up with and just kind of what we want this conversation to be about over these next several weeks. So you might begin with that, Irie.
I think the main thing is that we hope that we can all approach this conversation from a place of curiosity and open-heartedness. We're not here to debate. We're not here to represent our entire race or ethnic group. We're really here to learn and to hopefully facilitate some learning and maybe unlearning for you.
Yeah, one of the things I often say this is the understanding that really we're all learning, and we're all in the process of unlearning much. And one of the things I sometimes say is that we we live in a fully integrated bedroom. Sometimes I say house, but it's literally a bedroom. Um, but we're not. I am not over all of my own race stuff, and I am learning and unlearning, and still have a ways to go. And really, what we would like this conversation to be about, these sessions to be about, is helping bring people with us as we're all on the journey here. So this isn't a space where, as Irie said, we're here to debate. We're not necessarily experts, but we have found, I think, we've been on this journey for a while, and lately we have found Ibram Kendi's book and voice and research and vulnerability to really, I think, be a wonderful guide for us. And one of the things we see in this book is a real sense of genuine vulnerability and openness about his own journey. And that's probably the best place to start, is with what he calls his racist introduction. So this is the speech, right, that
Right.
he begins this work with. So Irie, I think as we were talking, that you could kind of begin with how you connected with what he's saying in the introduction.
I think it's very significant that the first words of this book are "my racist introduction." And I hope that that's really instructive for all of us, because all of us have had a racist introduction of some sort. When I hear conversations about race, the phrase "when I grew up" comes up a lot, or when I was in school, or my parents or my grandparents. That's our racist introduction. And I'm hoping that when we see Kendi be vulnerable and honest about his racist introduction as a young Black man, that we can see that we've all had a racist introduction. And I'm hoping that'll give us the space to really do some inward looking. I know for me, I really connected to a lot of what he was saying, because some of those messages that he's talking about in that speech, I grew up hearing as well, from leaders in the Black community, as well as from without the Black community. And so it was really, I liked him putting a name to it. And I really appreciated his willingness to open up his life for that kind of criticism and that kind of honesty.
What was your sense, okay, when we look at the speech or listen to the speech, however we did that, what's wrong with the speech?
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about this over the weekend, and I was thinking, I think a lot of people are going to read this and say, what's exactly wrong with it? What's wrong with telling young people to basically take control of their lives? What's wrong with telling people who seem to be on the wrong track to get on the right track? I think if you're not coming to this from this framework of what is racist, what is assimilationist, what is anti-racist, I think it's really difficult to see what could be wrong about that. What is wrong or problematic about what he was saying, I think it stems from a few different things. So one is that he's using one subsection of a group that's almost like hypothetical. They're not even real. That I don't even know that he's talking about specific people, but using this one particular subsection of the Black community to really speak to the problems of the entire community, or saying that because of this group, every Black person has this problem. But I think ultimately where I'm kind of coming down on this is, I think the problem is not just that. It's that to say that a person who is in the situations that he discusses in the book, that the reason that they're there is because of their own problematicness, right? So they're the problem. Ignoring the fact that they exist in the context of a racist society and racist policies that have made it very difficult for their grandparents, their parents, and themselves to build wealth and to build a different future. So the amount of effort and work that it takes, it's not just about, well, gosh, let me just pull up my pants to fit your idea of what a respectable person looks like. It's not just that. It's that once I do that, I submit that job application, I have this Black sounding name, I'm going to be less likely to get an interview. And then once they actually see me, I'm going to be less likely to get the job. So it ignores that broader context that Black youth are operating in. And I think that's what's so problematic about it.
Yeah. But I have to say, there's something compelling about it. The oratory of it, there's a sense of he's saying things that people want to cheer on and say, very powerful.
Yeah.
And I think one of the really interesting things he's doing right at the outset is saying he's owning that. Mm-hmm. He's recognizing that that's a part of his story, and that's part of the whole vulnerability thing. Is we're all in a process in the church, we say, of being transformed in our minds, of learning how to think differently. And one of the things I think is the goal of this class, our time together, is to learn to think differently and to problematize some of that language, which in some ways, just for not only for white persons, but for Black persons too, persons of color in general, has a certain potency to it.
Yeah, well, I think there's an appeal, right, in this kind of, if I can just pull myself up by my own bootstrap, I can fix the situation. I can get myself out of this situation. There is something very appealing, I think. The message was empowering as well, right? But it totally ignores the context, and it makes this problem the person who's actually experiencing the weight of the burden, and it doesn't place the problem on the shoulders of the policymakers or the historical figures that created a situation that led to that circumstance.
Okay, so one of the things we use policy, he is talking really a lot of what his journey. This is a book about his journey, but a lot of what he does comes from his scholarly understanding. He is a historian, someone who has really done a lot with African American studies, and a lot of this book is shaped by his own studies and his understanding of race and racism. And so when he begins to talk about definitions at the very beginning, at the outset, after the introduction, he gives the definition of being a racist as one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inactions, or expressing a racist idea. An anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. One of the things that when I read this, that I noticed, you can have no idea if you are supporting a racist policy,
right,
or even holding a racist idea, and yet still be a racist. And one of the, I think, important things he's saying in this is he's owning the fact that he has acted in a racist way, therefore has been himself a racist.
right.
I find that freeing, actually.
Like,
Competition.
I'm not sure if it's causing other issues, but
Not sure.
you're saying we've got some other issues, and we're not really quite sure how to address that. But you move in and out, right, of these different behaviors. I think it's important to know that racism, anti-racism, isn't necessarily a static place that we stay in. Most of us will move in and out of assimilation and thinking, and you just needed that.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Good?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. But that we can be aware for, I think I'm just, what? Kira's in the background. But I'm going to say that part again, that I think it's important to know that we leave in and out of these different states of being anti-racist, assimilationist, sometimes maybe even more overtly racist, that we move in and out of these states of being and not static. I think this is very, very different from the language a lot of us grew up with is, I'm not racist, that person's racist. As though it's a permanent state of being that we can never ever be party to. What he's saying, I think, is that not only our actions, anti-racist, assimilation, all our inaction can be very problematic as well, because the results can be a racist policy or a racist norm that is created.
So one of the things when he's talking about racism and his understanding of what it means to be not racist and how that in his mind is insufficient for how we need to interact now. Now, why is that? Why is he saying that?
Being not racist?
Right. Because I'm not racist.
Oh, wow. Okay. But choosing not to do something is doing something at the choice. And so if you are not choosing to advocate for or live into anti-racist policies, chances are you are in some ways supporting or party to party processes that are racist or policies that are racist. I think it's the equivalent of I don't see color. As he says, denial is the heartbeat of racism. We deny that it's a problem. We deny that it's there. We deny that we are party to it. And we have to benefit from in different ways. Even myself, in that maybe that's perpetuated the ideas. If we can't acknowledge that,
okay. We're gonna pause.
the speaker icon, our PC, right? Click on the speaker icon. Okay.
Frustrating.
I don't know. Maybe I can today's screen.
We don't know what the problem is.
Let us know if you can hear us.
Yes, we can hear you now. Did you click on
What the
playback?
problem is. Wow.
Thank you so much for hanging in there, everyone. We don't know why this is happening. We hope to have a smoother journey next week. We're just going to keep going. So sorry about that.
Okay, sorry. It's hard to stay up with the chat as well, but there was enough chatter from all of you telling us something was wrong that it finally got our attention, and I was trying to fix it. So we'll see how we do here. My apologies. Okay, so let's talk about, I think he begins to raise some, I think, important questions about the difference between racism and being racist and being discriminatory. And I'm going to quote something I think is really important out of chapter 1, where he says, the defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. Okay, what is he trying to say there with that quote?
I think he's saying I mean, basically, it's not enough to be not racist because there's been so much damage done from past racist policies. Let's take, for example, redlining and thinking about the effects that have taken place because of that. So, if you're not familiar with redlining, it was a policy that prevented Black people from living in certain neighborhoods, sometimes from banks giving them loans to live in certain neighborhoods. And so it effectively locked Black people in many cities out of home ownership. Think about how home ownership allows many people to pass on wealth to their children, and then to their grandchildren, and then to their great-grandchildren. In many cities, that whole process was denied to Black communities, sometimes until the 80s, formally and then informally later. That's a discriminatory practice that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to recover from. So, when we think about, well, how can we redeem that situation or repair that situation? We would be looking at something in the present to, many people have talked about reparations. That may sound discriminatory to give a group of people reparations for something and not give other people a group of reparations. But when you think about the generational wealth that was just not possible, and we're not even talking about slavery. Like, I'm not even talking about slavery. I'm talking about after slavery, during freedom, right? What mechanisms, what kind of anti-racist discrimination could help remedy that and rectify that? I think that's what he's talking about when he says, present anti-racist discrimination is the antidote to past racial discrimination. We usually call anti-racist discrimination affirmative action. Even though affirmative action benefits women, it benefits not just minorities. So it benefits women as well. I think women are actually the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action policies. But that's a way to remedy a long history of discriminating against groups who weren't white men.
Okay, there's a question in the chat about what page that quote is on. So that's on page 19, where he talks about the difference between being racist and being discriminatory. And really, I think it's important for us to begin to enter into the conversation, which challenges the notion I grew up with, which is, well, we need to be colorblind.
Well, you also grew up with the notion of reverse racism, right?
Well, I did, yes.
How many of you have heard that, right? Reverse racism.
Yeah.
Which
I was bussed in first grade, and I remember that being said.
And that was a way of discussing anti-racist discrimination, right? Reverse racism. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So we've kind of all been on a journey, and I think an important part of this is the understanding that though I'm a white man who's married to a Black woman, I come with my own sort of experience, and I was very much shaped, and I'm still trying to, deprogram so much of that kind of thought. But it's hard for me because I hear things like color blind or judging a person not by the color of their skin, but the content of the character, which on a certain level I agree with. But Kendi says, essentially, that is not what is going to allow us to break free from really the long history that is plaguing our country.
It will require discomfort. It will require letting go of certain ideas. We'll get into some more of this later, but I had to come to terms with the fact that I'm a light-skinned Black woman, and therefore I am perceived differently and more positively than a dark-skinned Black woman. And I mean, it's not a privilege I want. I didn't ask for it, but it's one that exists and that I have to be aware of moving through the world. Unlearning and deprogramming and remembering that I have a set of privileges that have afforded me certain opportunities, and not every single thing that I have I earned just by the merit of my hard work. I've worked hard, but I've also received some benefits from the privileges that I do have.
He's going to get into some of that later on in the sessions when we start talking about things like colorism, class, a lot of conversations that do kind of prick on us a little bit. So I want to talk here in just a moment a little bit about policies, because this word policies keeps coming up, and a few of you submitted questions relative to the idea of policies and what kinds of policies are out there that need to be examined really through the context of race, through the racial lens. I also want to open up the opportunity for people to submit more general questions or comments in the Q&A. So as I'm kind of engaging this question around policies, I want to invite people to submit kind of questions that you may have or comments you would like to share. But one of the things he talks about on page 22 of the book was about voter suppression in Wisconsin. Certain laws that are put into effect, which may appear to have no specific grounding in a racialized kind of way, but their outcome is fundamentally racialized. And so what you saw in Wisconsin in the 2016 election, if you look in the back in the footnotes, basically a 3% drop in the voter turnout from the previous presidential election, which had a disproportionate effect on persons of color. And so to say it's race neutral is, in its effect, in its ultimate outcome, untrue. And this is one of the things Kendi's wanting us to really wrestle with, is to understand that it's the outcomes that are important. Yes, it's important to have a sense of the motive, but the motives can sometimes be very, very hidden. And it's the outcomes that we also really need to be examining.
I think
go ahead.
To kind of piggyback off of that, when we think about hiring policies in many organizations, church or in a business, in a corporate environment, those are policies that I think can have, the outcome can be racist or, not anti-racist, but can be racist, but the intention isn't necessarily, bad or mean-spirited. But when you think about hiring policies that draw from acquaintances of people who already work at the organization, or colleges of people that work in the organization, or top tier colleges, which always happen to be historically white colleges, you tend to draw from a particular pool of people that favors the people that are already in the organization. If it's a organization that's primarily white or primarily male, you're going to get the same kinds of people joining the organization. And so it's a policy that on the face of it, there is no policy, right? There is no policy that relates to hiring people based on their background. But the effect of it could be that there's a lot of white men employed, or there are very few people of color employed, or there are very few people with disabilities employed, because of who's already there, who's already in the room.
One of the things that one of the questions that had come in was about Fort Worth, and are there racist policies in Fort Worth? I just thought it would be interesting to give some of the reported data back from the Race and Culture Task Force, which made its final report, I guess almost 2 years ago now. But one of the things they found in majority minority neighborhoods or areas in Fort Worth, that while minority neighborhoods or areas constitute 58% of street lanes, they constitute 77% of poor condition streets and 81% of poor condition sidewalks, and 66% of poor condition street lights. It's just interesting when you start looking at something through the lens of race that seems to be race neutral, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I think the importance of the acquisition of an equity officer, as the city has now hired, to begin to say, how is this really shaping our overall city, and what effect is it having on all persons, and particularly persons of color and other marginalized communities? And it's just one. I think probably the major one that we look at is the understanding of mass incarceration, and how we can talk language which seems to be color blind or color neutral about being tough on crime or something like that, but really is freighted with tremendous social consequence, particularly on communities of color.
Right. So Kendi we've been kind of binging on Kendi podcasts and Kendi everything, but he said in other podcasts, and he may say it in the book, that white people are more likely to use and sell drugs and are less likely to be arrested or incarcerated for those crimes than Black and brown people. So why is that? The effect of the policy, whatever it is racist. The implementation of the policy may be racist. The fact that most people, if you look at implicit bias studies, tend to see Black people as being more dangerous or more likely to be criminals than other groups of people, may create this environment where police officers are more present in Black communities. Police officers arrest Black people with more frequency. Black people end up in jail at greater numbers for similar crimes, with higher sentencing rates for similar crimes to white people. The effect of the policy, whether it's an explicitly stated policy or one just by de facto practice, the effect of those policies, we could say, are racist because they disproportionately affect people of color.
Okay, so a question had come in earlier today about liberation theology, and I think theology is an important part of this book. Kendi grew up in a Christian household, but has really struggled with his parents' religion. So I think it's an important voice for now for a church to be engaging, and that's a really, I think, important thing for me as a pastor to kind of engage his understanding of Jesus, Christianity, the whole concept of why the problematic history of the church in the ways in which it justified mistreatment of Black Africans and also Native peoples here, mm-hmm. and the enslavement of many, many people. So there was a question about liberation theology, and liberation theology really ties into exactly what Kendi's saying about discrimination in a positive sense, in the sense of paying attention to who's hurting, who's left out. And the Jesuits in the 1960s, I think, were the seminal people who really started thinking, along with a lot of African American theologians, about liberation and the message of Christianity. The language Jesuits came up with was a preferential option for the poor, and there's a sense in which you've got to give a sense of preferential attention and care to those who've been left behind because of the history, which continues to affect the present. And I think that that's at the heart of a lot of what he's saying here.
I think what's interesting about that is, for those of y'all who don't know me, I was not raised Christian. I was raised by two parents who had been Christian and decided not to be Christian for their own reasons. But so I was raised to be critical of the church, and also to be critical of I guess a religion that worshiped white Jesus.
Okay.
And so when I first read the Bible, I was not coming to it from this place of whatever the white church had said forever and ever about the Bible. I was coming to it from like, this is what the Bible says, and this is what the footnotes say to explain what the Bible says. I remember it was an Oxford English Bible. But when I read it, I was like, how come I never heard the Jesus Saves people in the South talking about, being kind to the foreigner because you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt, or blessed all their poor. So I think you could argue that framework that they came up with was already there. I mean, obviously it's already there because it's in the Bible, but I think many of us in this country have been blind to it because we wanted to be, because we didn't want to address the ways in which we were complicit in systems that continued to leave poor people in a situation where they couldn't get out of.
Well, I think one of the things he says through his scholarly work is the understanding that a lot of that theology that was adopted, the whole curse of Ham theology, which gave justification to the enslavement of African peoples, the curse of black peoples, and the whole manifest destiny theology that drove the Western expansion, which the church believed in, that it was written in order to justify the practices that were taking place, which were lucrative for a certain segment of persons. And this is where I kind of get into my own history of, I come from a family of slave owners in the 19th century in Mississippi and in Georgia. And there is a sense in which that we've carried that history propped up by the church itself. And really his understanding is that we developed a lot of what we did in order to give justification to the economic practices which were growing up. And so this is where it'll get a little discomfortable later on in our sessions when we talk about economics, which is an important thing to talk about.
But it does include that language of personal salvation, which is, before I became Christian, was my entire awareness of what Christianity was about. I remember there being like a big billboard that said, Jesus saves. And being like, I don't get it because I didn't have any context for it. But this idea of personal salvation being valued over and above what's happening to the bodies of people in your community and you.
Yeah.
That, I think, is from generations of theology that stemmed from trying to justify slavery and enslaved people keeping and knowing their place. Because it's all about your soul. It's all about what you believe, and not about what's happening to your body, and not about what you're doing to other people's bodies. I think that's all I need to say about that, right?
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about this assimilationist idea. He talks about segregation, which is basically the idea that people need to be separated, given legitimacy by the church and all kinds of kind of doctrines, which basically said that people are cursed or maybe even coming from different genesis, differing origins,
Oh, yes.
and black people or animalistic, or native peoples are animalistic. So you've got that sort of segregation mindset. That's probably not where most people are who are on this conversation tonight. But I think there's a lot more in the assimilationist kind of idea, and especially his context of a lot of the folks who were involved with abolition, and really a lot of the people that we can think of as seminal civil rights people, heroes of the 19th and 20th centuries, who were not out, in his mind, outright anti-racist, as we all aren't, but were assimilationist in their understanding of, well, we're going to free black people, but then they're going to need another 100 years before they get the right to vote, if they ever do. That kind of thinking that there's something essentially and inherently still wrong
Right.
with black people.
That's if you're looking at a Venn diagram, former teacher here. So we got the segregationist and the assimilationist. That overlapping circle is the idea that black people or brown people, or insert whatever group that you want to, is problematic and is the problem. Segregationists may say they're the problem and there's nothing you can do about it because they're inherently that way. And assimilationists may say, well, they're a problem, but it's just because, they don't know any better. One day they'll be like us, white people, right? And if we can just teach them the way, if we can just have them wear the right clothes, talk the right way, go to the right schools, pull up their pants, do all the things, then they will be as respectable and as deserving of rights and education and freedom as we are. It's the same argument. An assimilationist would say, now's not the right time for us to be talking about this issue. Like, I'm totally with you, I agree with you, but now's not the right time. We could just wait a few years or forever or never.
I want to talk about that. So when I first got out of seminary, we were married, and I was looking for a job. I had someone tell me, you really should consider looking at churches in the North, because in North Carolina, where we were at the time, in South Carolina, there's going to be a lot of communities that say, a lot of churches that say, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. Maybe the search committee is, but the community's not ready, which is an assimilationist kind of idea. And so that really gets into,
Can we pause for that for just a moment?
Yes.
Because I think it's worth noting, well, what's wrong with that? If I don't think my community's ready, then, I think what's wrong with that is that you're making a choice for a potential applicant, and they need to make that choice themselves. They need to make the choice of whether they think they are willing to enter an environment that you think is not ready. And for you to make the choice for them is problematic, particularly if you are a person with many, many privileges, to assume that you know what's best for a person that you don't know and have no relationship with.
Okay, I want to engage something he says in the book, when he, as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, is looking at schools and asks that black teacher if she is the only black teacher in the school, and she says yes, and he wants to know why. I think that why question is a really, really important one for us to wrestle with. why is it that our city council looks the way it does? Why is it that there's such a disproportionate representation of good, well-maintained streets in certain segments of our community and not in others? Why is it that the church continues to look the way that it does? I think that's a very important question that we all have to be asking is why. And I read that and I thought to myself, what about our own institution? What about Broadway Baptist Church? Why is it that we look the way that we do in not only the demographic within the church itself, but also the ministerial staff? And I don't think we can just simply say because those are the only qualified applicants, or that's the way that, that's just, they don't want to be here or whatever. I think this is about asking the hard question of why, and then taking the next step of saying, what would it take to change that? Mm-hmm. Which is a scary one. Yeah. I think it's scary for all of our institutions to be asking that. I know
because it's not an easy question, and it's not as simple as, finding some black person on the street and hiring to be the minister or whatever. It's a really more reasoned process of how did we get here and how do we get out of it, and what are the processes that we can't really see or don't pay attention to that we need to now see. I think we need to take some time to answer a few questions.
Go for it.
So one of the questions that we got earlier, I'm trying to pull it up.
Shifted gears.
Yeah, big shift.
But running out of time. We may go a little over the hour tonight because we had such a poor start.
Yeah, so feel free to stay on with us or to sign off if you need to. So we had a question that was about cultural groups that tend to kind of self-segregate, I guess you would say, or group together. They mentioned successful Black communities in the past, like Tulsa, the Vietnamese in Arlington. Is this kind of segregation good or bad? What does the optimum look like? So I want to kind of dismantle that question a little bit or untangle it a little bit, because when we look at certain communities, like the Black community in Tulsa, that was a community that existed really in the face of a racist society. So as a haven, a place where Black people could own things, could get loans, could go around without this constant double consciousness or dual lane consciousness. I mean, like how we read that chapter of being aware of how they saw themselves and also being aware of how the white society was seeing them. So it existed really in a very, very racist context. I think it's important to understand that for similar communities. That these were a necessity, and in many places still are a necessity, just to kind of exist. I do not think that they are bad. I don't think that Kendi would say that they're bad. I think we'll get into this later in the book where he talks about, the necessity for places for cultural, refugees, for refuges.
Spaces.
Yeah, for people.
Yeah.
I think what he would say also is that an individual needs to be able to move in and out of these spaces. So a Black person should be able to move in and out of the Black community, or, go to a Vietnamese store, and Vietnamese to be able to go into the Black community or stay, like different communities. There should be permeation that is able to happen. I think as we see it now, that question is really, really complicated because so many communities exist because, as he says, I don't have I'll find the page number for you, but where he says it's a crime to exist as yourself or empower yourself if you are not white and you live in a white society. I'm sorry, I cannot find that quote. I don't know where my note cards went. But basically, it says it's a crime, or it's considered a crime to exist as yourself, to present as yourself, with your hair as it grows out of your head, with your skin color looking the way it does, with your eyes being the shape that they are, with your accent being the way that it is. It's a crime to exist in that way, and to empower yourself and believe in your own worth in a racist society.
Mm. And
so these communities, I think, provide a really, really important space for people to exist and to be seen. So I don't think that they're bad.
Yeah, that's one of the, I think he makes a distinction. I can't remember where he says this in the book, or maybe it's in his book Stamped, but he does make a distinction between segregated spaces, lawfully segregated spaces, and spaces of separation. And so in his mind, some of these, the very concept of race itself is a necessity of survival in some kinds of ways, in grouping and gathering together. I think is an important part of, I mean, you think of the Black church, it's been a place of social organizing, and I think it has its value, of course. A question about double consciousness, you mentioned that, and this is basically W.B. Du Bois's idea that Black people see themselves through the lens of white people.
Well, they're constantly seeing themselves as they are and as white people see them. But what I like about what Kendi says, he likes dueling conscience,
yes,
which I think is great, because I think to some extent, all of us, everybody can probably relate to the idea of dueling consciousness. If you've ever been, like in a group of people that you thought were super fancy, you were always thinking about what they thought about you, or if you were in a new situation with new people that you didn't know, you're probably hyper aware of how you're presenting. That's the feeling that many people of color have all the time, because they're in majority white scenarios. Or it may be, if you're a woman, if you're in an industry or a context where you're around men all the time, you may be experiencing that same duality too, or that same duality too. It really kind of is like a dueling consciousness. Where I like what he says about the dueling consciousness is that white people and Black people both have this thing going on, right? And for white people, or white, let's say white America, there's this constant feedback loop of like, we want people of color to assimilate and be like us, speak the same way, look similarly, dress similarly, but then we reject them for either not fitting that mold, or we kind of look up and realize that, oh yeah, they're not white, and we kind of reject them. And then for Black people, there's this constant cycle of trying to assimilate and then being rejected and separating, and then trying to assimilate and then being rejected. And it's this constant cycle of acceptance and rejecting. And I think what's significant about it is that most of us aren't even aware that it's happening. It's not really at the forefront of our consciousness all day long. We just know that it's happening. I think maybe Kendi could help us put a finger on a feeling that we might have had before. I think any Black person who has heard, you're not really Black, has kind of experienced that idea of this duality that's happening, or you're not like other Black people, or you're so articulate, or you're so, what did Joe Biden say?
Joe Biden said that Barack Obama was articulate and bright and clean and nice looking, which is the same thing that people would sometimes say when they found out that I was engaged to a Black woman.
What they say? Tell the people.
She's Black, but she's pretty, but she's really smart. And see how that just starts with the premise that the Black body, the Black person is problematic. There can be exceptions, as there were in South Africa, when in South Africa they would actually designate Black persons as exceptionally white persons, so they could stay in a hotel or whatever in a majority white community. But those were the exceptions, because the problem is the black body itself
Right.
and the black person.
And I think over the years, I've come to see that for many people who are well-meaning people will see me at best as an exception to a rule for Black people. That is a constant thing that I have in my mind, that I understand when I'm interacting with people who are not Black or who are not people of color. Constantly aware of how I'm presenting myself. Was taught as a child that, you know, in order to succeed, you are going to need to work twice as hard to maybe get half as far, because there's this constant idea or understanding of what you are capable of as a Black woman or a Black person. It's exhausting, really, when you think about this duality that's constantly going on. I think, you know, he talks about microaggression,
Which he says is just racism.
right? He calls it racial abuse. I think it's really good for us to keep in mind, because the weight of all those microaggressions can really add up to a person.
Give an example of a microaggression.
Oh, like you're clean and articulate like that, or
Sure.
you're clean and you're articulate. Oh, can I touch your hair? Because you look like some kind of curiosity that I've never seen before.
I want you to know my parents gave me a black doll when I was a child.
That literally happened to us when we lived in Vermont. This lady came up to me. I did not know this lady, and she came. We were just minding our
We were
own
eating
business.
dinner.
She came up to me and was like, "I just want you to know, I had this black doll when I was growing up, and I loved that black doll." And I was really trying to figure out, why is this lady talking to me about her black doll? But I think what she was trying to communicate is, I'm open-minded, right? And then when I went back to the microaggressions, I had to think about when I've committed microaggressions to other people. And really, I think the heart of a microaggression is either, you know, you're very unaware and you're using someone as this kind of oddity that's there for you to learn more about or to remark upon. And I know that I've done that before. And so then I had to think about, like, man, not only did I say these things, and not only were they microaggressions, but they were racial abuse that I am guilty of perpetuating to other groups. I know that my intention was not to harm them. I know that my intention was to be like, I know stuff about your culture too. But the effect is that it's all about me. It's not about them. It's not about me getting to know them. It's not about me, you know, being their friend. It's about me showing them what I know.
Okay, I know we're over the hour. So a few take homes, y'all are already home, but kind of where we would like to end very, very quickly. One, I think it's so important the way Kendi models vulnerability, honesty. We're all works in progress, and we are going to fall and fail, and we're going to say things that just do not make sense when we begin to think and unpack them, and are racist. And one of the things, I think the important things he's doing in this book is helping us to understand that language of racist is really one that can be put on us or taken off, something that we can act in racist kinds of ways, and also act in anti-racist kinds of ways. And so that's really a broad stroke of what this book is about, is really understanding that we're making that move, but we've got to quit thinking of a racist as just Bull Connor with a bullhorn in 1963 in Birmingham with dogs, but understand the ways in which we are continuing to be complicit in a racist system with racist ideas, fostering racist practices, sometimes even when we don't know it.
There's a question about, what do we do to impact some of these systems, these policies? And I think really beginning with or from a place of curiosity versus a place of defensiveness. If we are really married to this idea that I'm a good person and therefore I cannot be racist, I think it's going to be really hard to see any movement and any growth personally, for ourselves. I think we've got to really think about ourselves, the people we support politically, the policies we support, both, legislatively and then maybe in our own churches and places of business. What are we thinking and doing and supporting that has the effect of being racist, assimilationist, or anti-racist? I think that's where it starts. And then I think when you're looking for it, you will see many things that you can improve and change. I think you'll start to, it'll happen slowly, but I think you'll start to notice, well, by golly, this policy isn't fair, it's discriminatory. I'm looking around and I don't see, any women in the room. I don't see any Black people. I don't see any people of color in the room. I'm not going to go with this whole, just if we can just change our hearts, that's not enough. Because we've got to change our hearts, our minds, and our actions too.
I think she should have the last word there. Thanks. I'm so sorry about the audio. Thank y'all for everyone who stuck with us. We appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
I think Jen's going to come back on and just say maybe a few brief words about follow-up and about questions that you can send in the meantime between now and next week when we gather back together. There she is.
Hey, Jen.
Okay, so yeah, we have quite a few questions. We have a couple of outstanding questions. I just want to let you know that I've captured those and we'll be sending them to Ryan and Irie to look at. We are having, we're using the email book study at broadwaybc.org, and I will put it in the chat, but that's also the email that we'll be communicating with all of you. So if you've registered, if you're here tonight, you're going to hear from us at that email, and it goes directly to Ryan and Irie as well so that they can see your questions and comments. Thank you for all of the feedback and being here and giving us a good idea of what you're looking for. I heard that you like the page number, so we'll be talking about that as well and giving you some good commentary. We also have some notes and some recaps from tonight that we'll be sharing. So just remember book study at broadwaybc.org.
Yeah, thanks so much. One thing I would say is someone either in the comments or the questions had mentioned the fact that there is a public discussion about the budget for the Fort Worth City, the Fort Worth City budget that is upcoming. Public discussion about what is a moral document. I think that's at 10 a.m. I think there was another discussion tonight, but I think there is a conversation tomorrow at 10 a.m. This is where a lot of things really, oh, great. Jen's already posted it. That's wonderful. So, okay. Click on that button and that will take you there. So these are important conversations. Thank y'all for being with us. We still have a long ways to go, and it's going to get tough. I mean, I think there's some things in this book that I'm like, wow, this is really, I'm having to wrestle with this. And I saw some of the questions about Black Lives Matter, questions about really who we want to be, what's the economic engine of all this thing. We're going to try to get into this, and that's one of the beauties about taking this book slowly.
Yeah,
so.
We'll see that in some of the later chapters, so we hope to address some of those questions then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go and be light.
Bye, y'all.